you. Good morning, good morning to you. Good morning, good morning. Won't you share with a friend or two? Good morning, good morning to you. You. Good morning, good morning, good morning to you. You. Good morning, good morning, good morning to you. You. Good morning, good morning to you. And many more, and many more, and many more. Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome, welcome, welcome to Daring Dialogues. I'm your host today, Shantae Charles, and I hope that you are having a great and wonderful day. It is Daring Dialogues Black Table Talk Edition, so I am both on the official Black Table Talk page and also on our Life Nation page. And it has been a fabulous whirlwind of a weekend celebrating Juneteenth and also celebrating fathers and father figures over this last weekend. So I hope those of you who are fathers out here, I hope that you were loved on. I hope that you were appreciated. I hope you received gifts beyond ties and mugs and socks, right? And so I hope that you were honored in that capacity as a father, as a leader, as a role model. Um, and life goes on, life happens. So you will see me hop up in probably about 10 minutes because I'm in the middle of cooking some food for the day. And I'm going to hop up and make sure that I turn my stove off and I will be back on the screen. So we have been looking at the life of Medgar, Malcolm, and Martin all at the same time. We started in May, and good morning to those of you who are coming in. We started in May, and we have been continuing through this month to look at their lives on Mondays. And we're probably going to continue this maybe another couple of Mondays, but we encourage you to get the books so that you can also look into their lives. If you're looking at and wondering what books I'm reading from A Life of Reinvention, Malcolm X by Manny Marable. Manny Marable has written several books on Malcolm X, and this is just one of them. We're also looking at Medgar and Merle, the story of the life of Medgar Evers and Merle Evers. And the subtopic on here is the love story that awakened America. And then we have been looking at a collection of King's messages, Strength to Love. We started here on last time, but we're going to come back to Malcolm this reading. So we'll start with Malcolm first and take a look at what is happening. Um, this is talking about, this first section is talking about the precarious circumstances that Malcolm was in. And now he's going to talk a little bit about the autobiography of Malcolm X in this section. When we get back to the Medgar book, he's going to be talking about um, slavery in Mississippi and how that carried over into the Jim Crow South. So let's read. A closer reading of the autobiography, as well as the actual details of Malcolm's life, reveals a more complicated history. Few of the book's reviewers appreciated that it was actually a joint endeavor, and particularly that Alex Haley, a retired 20-year veteran of the U.S. Coast Guard, had an agenda of his own. A liberal Republican, Haley held the Nation of Islam's racial separatism and religious extremism in contempt, but he was fascinated by the tortured tale of Malcolm's personal life. In 1963, the beginning of the collaboration of these two very different men, Malcolm had labored to present a tale of moral uplift to praise the power of the nation's leader, Elijah Muhammad. After Malcolm's departure from the sect, he used his autobiography to explain his break from black separatism. Haley's purpose was quite different. For him, the autobiography was a cautionary tale about human waste and the tragedies produced by racial segregation. In many ways, the published book is more Haley's than its author's. Because Malcolm died in February 1965, he had no opportunity to revise major elements of what would become known as his political testament. So I think that is pretty interesting to note that Malcolm doesn't get a chance to edit that work. So if you're reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, just understand Malcolm didn't get a chance to edit that work. My own curiosity about the autobiography began more than 2 decades ago, the writer says, when I was teaching it as part of a seminar on African American political thought at Ohio State University. Among African American leaders throughout history, Malcolm was unquestionably the most consummately political activist, a man who emphasized grassroots and participatory politics led by working class and poor blacks. Yet the autobiography is virtually silent about his primary organization, the OAAU. Nowhere in the text does its agenda or its objectives appear. After years of research, I discovered that several chapters had been deleted prior to publication. Chapters that envision the construction of a united front of Negroes from a wide variety of political and social groups, led by the Black Muslims. According to Haley, the deletion had been at the author's request after his return from Mecca. That probably is true, but Malcolm had absolutely no input on Haley's decision to preface the autobiography with an introductory essay by New York Times journalist M.S. Handler, who had covered Malcolm extensively during previous years, nor on Haley's own rambling conclusion, which frames his subject firmly within mainstream civil rights respectability at the end of his life. A deeper reading of the text also reveals numerous inconsistencies in names, dates, and facts. As both a historian and an African American, I was fascinated. How much isn't true in this autobiography, and how much has not been told? The search for historical evidence and factual truth was made even more complicated by the complex and varied layers of Malcolm's life. A master of public rhetoric, he could artfully recount tales about his life that were partially fiction, yet the stories resonated as true to most blacks who had encountered racism. From an early age, Malcolm Little, as he was born, had constructed multiple masks that distanced his inner self from the outside world. Years later, whether in a Massachusetts prison cell or traveling alone across the African continent during anti-colonial revolutions, he maintained the dual ability to anticipate the actions of others and to package himself to maximum effect. He acquired the subtle tools of an ethnographer, crafting his language to fit the cultural context of his diverse audiences. As a result, different groups perceived his personality and his evolving message through their own particular lens. No matter the context, Malcolm exuded charm and a healthy sense of humor, placing ideological opponents off guard and allowing him to advance provocative and even outrageous arguments. And that's a good stopping place for a moment while I go check on my food. I'll be right back. Smells good. All right, let us continue. Malcolm always assumed an approachable and intimate outward style, yet also held something in reserve. These layers of personality were even expressed as a series of different names, some of which he created, while others were bestowed upon him. Malcolm Little, Homeboy, Jack Carlton, Detroit Red, Big Red, Satan, Malachi Shabazz, Malik Shabazz, El Haj Malik El Shabazz. No single personality ever captured him fully. In this sense, his narrative is a brilliant series of reinventions, Malcolm X being just the best known of them. Like a great method actor, Malcolm drew generously from his background, so that over time the distance between actual events and the public telling of them widened. After his death, other distortions, embellishments by devoted followers, friends, family members, and opponents, turned his life into a legend. Malcolm was fascinating to many whites in a sensual, animalistic way, and journalists who regularly cover his speeches picked up a subdued yet unmistakable sexual subtext. M.S. Handler, whose home Malcolm visited for an interview in early March of 1964, attributed Malcolm's aura of physical prowess to his politics. No man in our time aroused fear and hatred in the white man as did Malcolm, because in him the white man sensed an implacable foe who could not be had for any price, a man unreservedly committed to the cause of liberating the black man. Even Malcolm, during his early years, routinely employed evocative metaphors to describe his personality. For example, portraying his time as a Massachusetts prison in 1946, he likened his confinement to that of a trapped animal. I would pace for hours like a caged leopard, viciously cursing aloud. Eventually, the men in the cell block had a name for me, Satan. Handler's wife, who had been present when Malcolm had visited her home, admitted to her husband, "You know, it was like having tea with a Black Panther." To Black Americans, however, Malcolm's appeal was rooted entirely different in cultural imagery. What made him truly original was that he presented himself as the embodiment of the two central figures of African American folk culture, simultaneously the hustler and trickster, and the preacher and minister. Janus faced, the trickster is unpredictable, capable of outrageous transgressions. The minister saves souls, redeems shattered lives, and promises a new world. Malcolm was a committed student of black folk culture, and to make a political point, he would constantly mix animal stories, rural metaphors, and trickster tales. For example, refashioning the fox versus the wolf as Johnson versus Goldwater. His speeches mesmerized audiences because he could orchestrate his themes into a narrative that promised ultimate salvation. He presented himself as an uncompromising man wholly dedicated to the empowerment of black people without regard to his own personal safety. Even those who rejected his politics recognized his sincerity. Obviously, the analogy between the actor as performer and the political leader as performer goes only so far. But the art of reinvention in politics does demand the selective rearrangement of a public figure's past lives and elimination of embarrassing episodes, as Bill Clinton has taught us. In Malcolm's case, the memoirs written by friends and relatives have illustrated that the notorious outlaw Detroit Red character Malcolm presented in his autobiography is highly exaggerated. The actual criminal record of Malcolm Little for the years 1941 to 1946 supports the contention that he deliberately built up his criminal history, weaving elements of his past into an allegory documenting the destructive consequences of racism within the U.S. criminal justice system and penal system. Self invention was an effective way for him to reach the most marginalized sectors of the black community, giving justification to their hopes. So um, he is going to, he says that his primary purpose in this book is to go beyond the legend, to recount what actually occurred in Malcolm's life and present facts that Malcolm himself could not know, such as the extent of illegal FBI and New York Police Department surveillance and the acts of disruption against him, the truth about those among his supporters who betrayed him politically and personally, and the identification of those responsible for his assassination. And so, if you want to get, like I said, if you want to get one of the books by Manning Marable that sort of gives more in depth on who Malcolm was, and like he said, all the other parts surrounding him that he couldn't have known about, you want to check out this book, A Life of Reinvention, Malcolm X by Manning Marable. All right, we're going to hop back into Medgar's story. Let's take a look and see if I have some comments here. I have a few comments on Black Table Talk, but I do not see anybody currently viewing. Maybe they're just kind of hanging out in the background there. Good morning, Pastor Ben. Good morning, Leslie. Good morning, Christina. Good morning, Sifty. Good morning. Good morning. Leslie said, we have to consider his age. He likely was trying on different aspects of himself. Very good point. Very good point. I don't think any of us, well, I'll just put it this way. There are very few of us who know ourselves completely at a young age and stay within that self and continue within that self. I think sometimes we know parts of our destiny, parts of our calling. I knew when I was 9 years old that I was going to be in the field of art and work as an artist. I knew that that was what I wanted to do with my life. I started out wanting to be in the field of architecture, got all the way to the School of Architecture, did my first year in the School of Architecture, and then realized by exploration and really allowing myself to know myself, I realized I don't want to do this kind of art for the rest of my life. I was realizing that I was more of a people person, and the way that architecture worked then, it was very much an isolating kind of profession. And so I knew that I liked people. I enjoyed being around people. I enjoyed talking with people and being in community and doing what I do right now, teaching. And so I said, I want to merge those two things. So, what is going to be the best field for me to merge? The fact that I like people, I love teaching, but I'm also a artist. And those two things came together for me in art education. So that's what I have my degree in, is in art education. And that has expanded to arts plural because I operate in a lot of the arts. So whether that is visual art, dance, theater, um, music production, those are all of the arts that I operate in. So my degree makes sense for me. And I think that's a really good point. He was trying on different aspects of himself. And I think a lot of young people right now don't get a chance to do that. I knew this was back in the 90s. I knew that they were going to start closing that explore yourself, be who you want to be, try out different things. You started to see that door close in the 90s with things like the magnet program. And I've always had this contention as an educator, that the magnet program, though it means well, it is limiting. Because for somebody like me who is multi-talented, I was forced to choose a discipline to go into and just focus on that discipline. Well, now children have greater options, especially if they have parents that are willing to allow them to explore. they can become good at more than one artistic skill and talent. But that wasn't always the case, right? And now in public school, it's even less of the case because they're now trying to steer everybody back into this worker bee mode. And so that's now where you see the cutting of the arts, the cutting of these programs that help students to explore outside of their basic knowledge. And I think that's going to be a mistake in the long run. We're already kind of seeing the fallout of that. What happens when people do not explore and explore the arts? They don't develop the they don't develop the empathy around getting to know other people, their cultures, all of those good things. It's cutting out the humanities in a way, because when you get to college, you're exploring a little bit of the humanities. Public school, you were getting a little taste of that, but now with the cutting of lots of arts programs and funding for arts programs, even that is being narrowed down. Hence the homeschool increase. Yes, yes. So you have some people who are increasing in homeschool because they don't want their precious white children around black children. That's a different kind of homeschool school group. But you do have some people now that homeschool is increasing because they're seeing that public school is becoming narrower and narrower and narrower and narrower in terms of what they're offering children. And they're doing that because they're trying to get back to this industrial revolution mindset, even though the nation has advanced past the industrial revolution mindset. They still want children to be educated in that kind of mindset because they want worker bees. And really, I don't know how successful that plan is going to be. The way that the United States, especially, is pushing AI, um, if you're pushing people into this worker bee mindset, and AI is going to be replacing the majority of those jobs required for that mindset, it seems very backwards to do that. Because then you're going to have a whole bunch of people who, for lack of a better word, are undereducated, and they don't have anywhere to go from there with AI taking over those jobs. It's very backwards. Unless, hear me out, you are planning to bring them back into an agricultural society, a enslaving society, where you having them have them do sort of the manual labor that your AI technology can't do. There's that. So a lot of people, a lot of parents are starting to like clock what's happening in that regard, and they're saying, I don't want my child sent to the fields because they lack the education and the proper tools to move them along, economically and even technological wise. So let me intervene in what is happening. And the other part of that is, um, when we look at what's happening with public school, we look at what's happening with them totally destroying the federal level of the Department of Education. Less services, less services to children that are disabled, less services to children that are learning disabled, um, less arts education. All of those things speak to, um, preparing for the enslavement of a new generation. That's what it speaks to. Closing the civil rights departments, that speaks to the preparation of another generation for enslavement, not empowerment, but enslavement. And so people who are looking at that, parents who are looking at that are saying, not on my watch. My child is not going to be a part of your new indoctrination plan for enslavement. And so, parents are doing what they can now to minimize that. Okay. Um, yes, they can do tasks, but they do not understand what their goals are or if they are sustainable. And yeah, they are trying to diminish inspiration because that's what happens when you take away the arts. Now let's talk about Medgar's life, and we're going to look at slavery in Mississippi. And actually, this conversation that we're about to read ties into what we're talking about with the school system. And I want you to listen and see how it ties in and what they share about enslavement, how it's tying into what you might be seeing right now that's happening in the school system. In 2000, I think they said it was before 2000. 2000, I think they said 2018 was when officially black and brown children began to outnumber white children enrolled in public school. I actually saw it begin to happen a little earlier than that in 2012. 2012, especially in the rural areas, black children in public schools began to outnumber white children in public schools. And as I saw that as an educator, I said to myself, they're going to start pulling supports out of public education because it's almost like they feel like too many black and brown people are benefiting from this free public education. And as the numbers of white participants in public education goes down, it's going to be easier for them to start snatching resources. Why? Because their children are not going to be as affected by the snatching of the resources. And here we are in 2026, seeing them do exactly that. So let's read on here. Slavery in Mississippi and throughout the South have been characterized by, listen to the first thing, forced breeding. Forced breeding. What do we have now? We have men in the White House doing press releases saying that women are underbabied, that they're not having enough children. And they're specifically talking about white women. They're not necessarily talking about black women. They're saying they're underbabied, i.e., forced breeding is next. Okay? Slavery in the South had been characterized by forced breeding and relentless sexual violence. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly what you think. Yet the sons and grandsons of the men who built that system and who fought to defend it during the Civil War built their postbellum Southern culture around the constant fear that black men were fixated on intimately assaulting white women. And even though the South's defeat at the war's end failed to stop the sexual assaulting of black women, these sons and grandsons of enslavers invented a palliative for their fears: lynching. Now, I want you to think about how twisted this is, that you, the sons and the grandsons of the enslavers and the enslavers, were the ones who were, in fact, doing the sexual assault, not only to white women, but black women. They were the ones doing the sexual assault, but they were projecting their actions and behaviors onto black men. And because they would not face what they themselves were doing, they create a whole fear towards black men around something they were doing. And the answer to that fear that they had created, that they were projecting, was lynching. In Mississippi and across the American South, black life was cheap. A black man, woman, or child could be killed for anything or for nothing: for looking at a white man wrong, or testifying against him in court. Okay, these are things that we talked about the last time we read, but I want to reiterate them. For brushing against a white woman on the sidewalk because you didn't jump into the gutter fast enough, for talking rudely to a white man or woman or even to a white child, or answering yes without tacking on the sir or the ma'am. I've been teaching about this probably since the top of this year. We've been talking about Jim Crow etiquette and code on my Black Table Talk page, and I consistently have people coming over trying to tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about. When I tell them that saying yes, ma'am, and yes, sir is a part of Jim Crow etiquette and that you could be unalive for not doing so. And I have people saying, "Oh no, that's just respect. That's just that's just a part of being respectful." No, no. It was not just a part of being respectful for black people. It could be a matter of life and death for you. If you said yes and you left off the sir or the ma'am, your life was in danger every minute of the day. You lived at the whim of any white person's momentary moods. This is the writer's words here. And they knew the law, which was deeply enmeshed in white supremacy, would not touch them. For the first 100 years after slavery officially ended, white people in the South got in bigger trouble for killing a pig or a dog than for killing a black person. Slavery hadn't really ended for the sharecroppers still tied to white planters' land, and for those trapped in the pernicious system of convict leasing that thrived in the loophole of the 13th Amendment. Police existed solely to serve white people, to excuse their crimes, and to bully, bludgeon, and control black bodies. The Peckerwoods, as the rich white people called the poor whites, were the most dangerous whites. Their shops and feed stores served primarily black customers, and the planter class and the sell to white shopkeeper classes unleashed them to exercise their frustrations on black bodies. Slavery was 70 years gone, Charles Evers later wrote, but the system I was raised in might as well have been slavery. White folks segregated the N words to hold us in line. They forced us to sharecrop, worked us like mules, walked on us like dirt. We lived in shacks and shanties, went down cheap, and grew old with nothing. Half of us died as children, the other half were always in danger. You drank that in with mama's milk. You knew you were an N word the very first time you rode in a car and couldn't use the bathroom at the service station and had to relieve yourself in the woods just off the road, hiding from passing cars. Remember, we talked about how the white plantation owners who ran every rural southern town would close the black schools during planting season so that black children could pick cotton in their fields. Last time we talked about the Evers's boys viewing of a lynching for the first time. We talked about how they would leave up the symbols of lynching in the community. I told you about the symbol of lynching in the community that I was serving in for some years down in Culpeper, Virginia. They left a noose hanging in the tree where someone had been lynched, and the noose was there for 33 years before it fell to the ground. Nobody touched that noose. They let it hang there because it was a visual symbol that if you don't line up, if you don't get in line, if you don't submit to the culture around here, you will find yourself on a tree. Now, we also talked about the small ways in which the Evers boys would sort of strike back at this system, and how, because they blocked young black boys from doing things like paperboy routes, the Evers boys would try to enact their own little form of revenge by destroying the papers and attacking some of the paper boys on those routes who were being given the jobs instead of them. Despite their mother's deep disapproval and fear for her youngest boys, James Evers seemed to quietly approve of their bravery. He had long taught his sons that most racist whites were bullies, but also cowards, only capable of harming you when they greatly outnumbered you or caught you out alone. A smaller number were truly dangerous, mostly because they had authority or associated with those who did. Every colored man or boy needed to know the difference. Charles was particularly eager to test that theory often. He was angry and rambunctious, and he and Medgar were constantly engaged at hijinks, often to make a buck. They swiped pecans or other small items from a local shopkeeper and sold them, always looking for little businesses to get into. Years after the Defender play fell apart, they started bootlegging, which was strictly illegal in dry Mississippi. Sometimes they drove the liquor to wet Tennessee in their great uncle's hearse. Charles called Medgar the saint of the Edwards family. He was as studious and serious as Charles was in his balled up rage. Charles gave him the nickname Lope, a play on the name of an old black preacher who used to come to the Evers house during revivals and eat up all the pies and treats that Miss Evers whipped up for the pastors but couldn't afford to fix for her kids during an average week. The two brothers shared a deep resentment over the treatment of blacks in Mississippi and were determined to make something of themselves. Even as children, Charles and Medgar moved with resoluteness. For Medgar, that included a drive to stay in his home state, come what may. It came from his natural stubbornness and from knowing that his family's blood ran deep into the Mississippi soil. And we're going to stop there for today. These men are all living in the same time. We did not get to Martin's work today. We'll start there hopefully on next week. We'll be looking at his words transformed nonconformist. And what does that mean? All right. Leslie says, I think every town in East Texas has a lynching tree or the like. You might be right. You might be right. All right. I am going to add you, Pastor Ben, for some conversation. And I'm going to go check really quickly on my food that I'm cooking. So let's get my ad going. All right. I have sent you the link, and hopefully you will come on in just a moment. And let's see if my Black Table Talk is going to end today. We will see. All right. I will talk with Black Table Talk soon.